If you think betrayal only hurts when it's loud, you've never been laughed at by the people you bled for. I gave my life to raise my granddaughter, sold heirlooms, burned through savings, and buried my own dreams only to be mocked as ugly by the two people I loved most. But that laugh would become the sound that ruined them. This isn't just a family drama, it's the story of how an old woman's quiet pain became their greatest undoing. The Chicago sky that day was an iron-gray lid, the kind that made every breath feel heavy. I sat on the hospital's cold plastic chair, holding my daughter's hand as machines hissed around us. Lila's pneumonia had spread too far. Doctors whispered complications, but I knew the truth. My baby was slipping away. When her heart monitor flatlined, the silence screamed louder than any alarm. My world narrowed to the trembling little girl in the hallway clutching a stuffed rabbit, Amelia. 10 years old. Orphaned in an instant. "Grandma," she whispered, voice cracking. I knelt, wrapping her in my arms. "I'm here, baby. I'm not going anywhere." That night, I sat by the apartment window, watching city lights smear through my tears. I'd lost a daughter, but I'd been given a purpose. Amelia would not suffer like her mother did. I made a promise under my breath, a promise the universe itself seemed to hear. No matter what it takes, I'll protect her. Years blurred into sacrifice. I worked double shifts at a small accounting firm, stretched every dollar until it screamed, and sold my grandmother's pearl necklace to pay Amelia's tuition at St. Brigid's Academy. When she cried over calculus, I brewed tea and stayed up until dawn tutoring her. When college brochures arrived, I beamed through the exhaustion. By the time Amelia left for Columbia University, she was confident, polished, and ambitious, everything I'd prayed for. On her first winter break back home, she glowed with stories about New York internships and new friends. That's when she mentioned Dylan Harper. "Grandma, you should see him," she said, cheeks flushed. "He's brilliant. He's different." The first time Dylan visited Chicago, he wore a navy suit to a casual pasta dinner. His handshake was firm, his smile blinding, his eyes constantly scanning the room like a predator assessing prey. I felt an unease I couldn't name. He was charming, too charming. Over the next few years, Amelia's visits became shorter, her phone calls fewer. Dylan was always in the background, opening a new tech startup, wooing investors, traveling constantly. When I asked if he'd proposed, Amelia blushed but avoided my eyes. Then came the Sunday afternoon that split my world in two. The winter sun slanted across my kitchen as I poured sweet tea and asked lightly, "So, when are you two thinking of tying the knot?" Amelia hesitated. Dylan didn't. He laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "LOL," he said, shrugging, "we got married last week. We only forgot to invite the ugly people." The tea pitcher slipped from my hands and shattered on the tile. Amelia's face burned crimson, but she didn't defend me. The man I'd warned her about smirked like it was all a harmless joke. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forced a brittle smile, and murmured, "Congratulations." Then I excused myself, shut my bedroom door, and let my tears soak the pillow. But grief didn't stay grief. It hardened into something colder, sharper. Dylan and Amelia thought they'd humiliated me. They thought I was powerless. They were wrong. Subscribe, like, and comment if you're hooked, because what goes around is just beginning to come around. The weeks after Lila's funeral were a blur of casseroles from neighbors, sympathy cards stacked like unpaid bills, and Amelia's quiet sobbing at night. I learned to sleep with one ear open, ready for her nightmares. In those early days, the weight of responsibility felt like a mountain, but every time Amelia smiled, I found new strength. Money was tight. I sold my wedding china, my husband's rare coin collection, even the battered upright piano Amelia loved to bang on. My co-workers at the accounting firm called me frugal. They didn't know I was saving for Amelia's future, not for rainy days but for hurricanes. When Amelia turned 13, I pulled her aside after school. "Honey," I said, "dream big. Don't settle for scraps just because life handed them to you." She hugged me hard and whispered, "I won't, Grandma." In high school, she was brilliant. She joined the debate team, ran cross-country, and graduated near the top of her class. I kept every program, every ribbon. At her graduation, while other families cheered with balloons, I just held her hand and thought of Lila. St. Bridget's wasn't cheap. I remember the night I sold my grandmother's pearls online. The buyer's cash saved Amelia's final semester's tuition. The pearls had been in the family for 3 generations, but I didn't flinch. Amelia's future was worth far more. By the time she left for Columbia, Amelia had offers from several schools. We packed her suitcase together in our tiny apartment. She hugged me so tight I could hardly breathe. "You're my whole world," she said. I blinked back tears and smiled. "Go build yours, sweetheart." New York changed her. At first, it was small things: her wardrobe, her accent, the way she ordered lattes instead of black coffee. Then came the stories about Dylan. "He's this visionary entrepreneur," she said during a phone call. "He's pitching an app that'll revolutionize logistics." I'd seen men like Dylan before. On Wall Street, they arrived like comets, burning bright, charming everyone, then vanishing in scandal. I warned her gently, "Sweetheart, make sure his dreams aren't built on smoke." She laughed it off. "Grandma, you worry too much." When Dylan visited for the first time, he charmed my neighbors, complimented my casserole, and offered to advise me on my investments. But beneath the polished exterior, I saw a flicker of disdain when he glanced at my modest apartment. That flicker told me everything. As months passed, Amelia's visits shortened. She missed Thanksgiving, then Easter. "Dylan has meetings," she explained. When she did visit, she seemed distracted, scrolling through her phone while I cooked. Still, I trusted the bond we'd built. I believed love and gratitude would guide her choices. But I underestimated Dylan's influence and the subtle ways ambition erodes memory. The day of the infamous insult burned into me. It wasn't just his words, it was Amelia's silence. The girl I'd raised didn't defend me. In her eyes, for a fleeting moment, I was small, embarrassing, expendable. I didn't confront them. I didn't shout or cry. That night, I opened an old lockbox beneath my bed. Inside were documents, passwords, and the names of people who still owed me favors from my Wall Street days. The fire of betrayal illuminated a path I'd hoped never to walk again. This wasn't just about an insult. It was about reminding them and myself who I truly was. If this chapter gripped you, subscribe, like, and drop a comment, because the storm gathering in Chapter 3 will change everything. The first time I saw Dylan Harper in my home, he was framed by the evening glow of my kitchen window, his tailored navy suit looking absurd against my chipped countertops. He shook my hand with a calculated grip, firm but not too firm, the kind designed to make you feel important while subtly asserting control. "Mrs. Callahan," he said, flashing teeth so perfect they looked unreal, "I've heard so much about you. Amelia says you're the rock in her life." I offered a polite smile, though his eyes were already scanning the room, landing on the antique clock on my wall like he was assessing its value. I'd seen those eyes before, back when I worked with traders who could spot weakness in a handshake. Dinner that night was awkward. Dylan complimented my lasagna, then launched into a monologue about his startup. "We're disrupting supply chain logistics," he said, gesturing dramatically with his fork. "We're talking multi-billion-dollar potential." Amelia gazed at him like he hung the moon. "Isn't he amazing, Grandma?" she said, her voice dreamy. I nodded but felt unease curl in my stomach. Dylan reminded me of the men who played fast and loose with fortunes, leaving wreckage behind. I asked, "And what happens if an investor pulls out?" He smirked. "They won't. They'd be fools." That arrogance was the first red flag. Months passed, and Dylan became a fixture in Amelia's life. They traveled to Miami, Aspen, and Silicon Valley. She stopped calling me on Sundays. When she did, she mentioned Dylan's big meeting or urgent pitch more often than her own achievements. One summer evening, I tried again. "Amelia," I said on the phone, "don't let someone else's dreams swallow your own." She sighed. "Grandma, Dylan's building something huge. You don't understand the startup world." But I did understand, better than she realized. I'd spent years auditing companies that imploded under similar golden boy leaders. The next Thanksgiving, Amelia brought Dylan to dinner. My neighbors, the Garcias, were there. Dylan dazzled them with tales of private jet rides and exclusive parties. When I offered him pumpkin pie, he said with a grin, Carbs are for people who aren't closing Series B funding rounds. The Garcias laughed. I did not. After dessert, while Amelia washed dishes, Dylan approached me. You've done well, Mrs. Callahan, he said softly. Raising Amelia like that. But she's part of something bigger now. Don't hold her back. It was a warning cloaked in politeness. When Amelia returned to Columbia, I sat alone at the table, the sound of the wind rattling the windows. Something deep inside whispered that Dylan Harper wasn't just dangerous, he was inevitable trouble. But love makes people blind. And Amelia was already blind. If Dylan's charm gives you chills, subscribe, like, and leave a comment, because in Chapter 4, the cracks start to show. The winter Amelia turned 23, Chicago was buried under snow. She called less, and when she did, Dylan's voice sometimes interrupted in the background. Tell her we're busy, I overheard him once, his tone dismissive. At Christmas, I mailed a small package, a silver locket that once belonged to my mother. Amelia texted, thanks, Grandma. Dylan says jewelry like that is quaint. Quaint. The word stung. By spring, Amelia had graduated and moved in with Dylan in Manhattan. Their apartment overlooked Central Park, paid for partly by investor advances. She sent photos, designer furniture, rooftop views, Dylan shaking hands with venture capitalists. One Saturday, she called, her voice high with excitement. Grandma, Dylan's company is being featured in TechVision. They're calling him the next big disruptor. That's wonderful, honey, I said, though dread twisted in my gut. I'd seen headlines like that before. They rarely ended well. 2 weeks later, Dylan visited Chicago alone. He claimed he was scouting Midwest opportunities, but I suspected he wanted to size me up. Over coffee, he leaned back in his chair and asked casually, Mrs. Callahan, do you have any investments? I have enough, I replied. He smiled. You know, I could turn your savings into something extraordinary. I'm sure you could, I said coolly. But extraordinary things tend to burn out. He laughed it off, but his eyes hardened briefly. Back in New York, Amelia posted photos online, her and Dylan on a yacht, her wearing a diamond bracelet, Dylan popping champagne. To outsiders, it looked perfect. To me, it looked like a house of cards. I called Amelia one night. Sweetheart, are you sure about Dylan? Grandma, she said, her voice clipped, you're being unfair. Dylan's incredible. He's building a future for us. You don't get it. She hung up before I could answer. The next time they visited Chicago, Dylan's arrogance had grown. He dismissed my cooking, bragged about an investor who'd sell his soul for a piece of his company, and made a joke about Midwestern peasants. Amelia laughed. Not nervously, not apologetically, she laughed. That night, I sat by the window, staring at the snow falling under the streetlight. My gut screamed a warning, but I pushed it down. I told myself Amelia was smart, that she'd see through him eventually. I was wrong. Subscribe, like, and comment if you're feeling the tension. Chapter 5 will deliver the blow that changes everything. It was a Sunday in late autumn, the kind where Chicago's wind cuts like a blade but the sun pretends to be kind. Amelia and Dylan stopped by unexpectedly. I brewed sweet tea, the way Amelia loved when she was little, and set out a plate of lemon cookies. As we sat at the table, I asked, so, when's the big day? Have you picked a date? Amelia glanced at Dylan nervously. He didn't hesitate. He laughed loud, sharp, and cruel. LOL, he said, leaning back in his chair, we got married last week. We only forgot to invite the ugly people. The words sliced through the air. The tea pitcher slipped from my fingers, shattering on the tile. Amelia's cheeks flushed. She opened her mouth, but no defense came. Dylan smirked, sipping his tea like nothing had happened. For a heartbeat, the room was silent except for the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. I swallowed hard, forcing my lips into a brittle smile. Congratulations, I whispered. I excused myself, retreating to my bedroom. The walls seemed to close in as I sat on the edge of my bed. Memories flooded in Amelia's first school play, the nights I stayed up tutoring her, the pearls I sold for her tuition. All those sacrifices, mocked in one sentence. Through the thin walls, I heard Dylan laughing again. Something inside me shifted. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was clarity. I realized that to Dylan, I was irrelevant, and to Amelia, I was expendable. When they left, I didn't cry. I opened the old lockbox under my bed and pulled out the folder of contacts, passwords, and financial records I hadn't touched in years. The paper smelled faintly of dust and opportunity. That night, I drafted a single line in my journal: they think they're safe. They're not. For 2 days, I stayed silent. I went about my routine, shopping for groceries, nodding at neighbors, smiling faintly when the Garcias asked about Amelia. But inside, the storm gathered strength. Dylan's empire thrived on borrowed trust. And trust, especially in the world of finance, can be withdrawn with a whisper. On Tuesday, I made my first call. If that moment broke your heart and made you hungry for revenge, subscribe, like, and comment, because in the next chapter, the quiet storm begins to roar. The morning after I drafted that single ominous line in my journal, the city outside my window seemed unnervingly calm. The world moved on as if nothing had happened. Buses hissed down icy streets, a dog barked 2 buildings over, and the Garcia's youngest boy laughed on his way to school. But inside me, something had changed. I brewed black coffee and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the folder of old contacts. Decades ago, I'd built a reputation on Wall Street as a woman who could untangle a company's hidden weaknesses faster than anyone. The men I'd outsmarted back then still owed me respect and, in some cases, favors. I'd stepped away from that world when my husband's failed investments nearly bankrupted us, choosing a quieter life. But I hadn't forgotten how to pull strings. By noon, I'd called an old colleague, Martin Lowe, now a quiet but powerful consultant for major venture funds. "Martin," I said, my voice smooth but deliberate, "do you still have ears inside Everstone Capital?" "Margaret." His voice was surprised, then cautious. "It's been a while." "It has. But I need a word in the right ear." "Who's the target?" I let a small smile creep onto my lips. "Dylan Harper." There was a pause. Then a low whistle. "The golden boy of logistics tech. What's he done?" "Nothing yet. But I'd like his investors to take another look at his numbers." Martin didn't press. In the world we'd inhabited, debts were honored without questions. "Consider it done," he said. That night, I reread Dylan's company reports, which Amelia had once proudly shown me. The numbers were impressive on the surface, but I spotted inflated projections, unverified vendor contracts, and risky debt structures. It was a house of cards. 2 days later, whispers began circulating among investors. Questions were asked quietly, behind closed doors. A subtle tremor ran through Dylan's empire. Meanwhile, Amelia called. "Grandma," she said, her voice unusually soft, "things have been stressful. Dylan's worried about some rumors." I kept my tone neutral. "Rumors? About the company? Investors are nervous." She hesitated. "You tell me if you heard anything, right?" "Of course, honey," I said, masking my satisfaction. After the call, I sat in the dark, the city lights winking through the curtains. My heart ached for Amelia. She was still my granddaughter, still the little girl who once brought me dandelions. But love didn't erase betrayal. Dylan thought he was untouchable. He was about to learn that even the quietest storms can destroy. If you're feeling the tension rise, subscribe, like, and comment, because in Chapter 7, the strings I pull will tighten. By the following Monday, Dylan's investors were restless. Everstone Capital froze their next funding round, citing financial inconsistencies. Another investor quietly backed out. Dylan, used to rooms that adored him, now faced silence and side eyes. Martin texted me, "Your whisper turned into an echo." But whispers weren't enough. I dug deeper, combing through Dylan's startup's digital footprint late at night. Using an old contact from my auditing days, I found proof of fabricated vendor contracts, documents Dylan had forged to pad revenue reports. I drafted an anonymous tip to a mid-level journalist at Business Ledger, a publication known for exposing startup scandals. The email was short: "Check Harper Logistics vendor agreements. The numbers don't add up." 3 days later, an article appeared, "Concerns grow over Harper Logistics financial transparency." It didn't accuse Dylan outright, but it planted doubt. Stock options were quietly sold. Partnerships paused. Meanwhile, Amelia posted a photo on social media, her and Dylan, smiling at a charity gala, pretending everything was fine. But the comments hinted otherwise. Heard rumors about Harper Logistics, true? Dylan's pride began to crack. That Friday, he called me. Margaret, he said, forcing politeness, have you heard any chatter about my company? Chatter? I replied lightly. Oh, Dylan, people always talk. Just making sure you're not involved. His suspicion was delicious. Why would I be? I said, my voice smooth as glass. That night, I received another text from Martin. 2 more investors are pulling out. Whatever you're doing, it's working. I wasn't done. I contacted an old SEC acquaintance, someone I'd once helped expose a corporate fraud case. If you were to look at Harper Logistics, I said carefully, you might find something interesting. The following week, Dylan hosted an emergency investor dinner in Manhattan. But instead of pledges of loyalty, he faced pointed questions and uneasy glances. Amelia called afterward, her voice shaking. Grandma, something's happening. Dylan's furious. He says someone's sabotaging him. My throat tightened, but my resolve didn't waver. Amelia, sometimes sabotage is just the truth catching up. She went quiet. The next morning, I looked at Dylan's smug face on a magazine cover, now framed by headlines about growing scrutiny. I whispered to the photo, you started this the day you laughed. If you're loving how the quiet storm is turning into a hurricane, subscribe, like, and comment. Chapter 8 is where desperation knocks on my door. 2 days after Dylan's investor dinner imploded, a frantic pounding rattled my front door. I set my teacup down and opened it to find Dylan and Amelia standing on my porch. Dylan's designer jacket was wrinkled, his perfect hair disheveled. Amelia's mascara streaked her cheeks, her eyes swollen from crying. For a brief moment, I saw the little girl she'd once been, vulnerable and scared. Grandma, Amelia whispered, clutching her stomach, we don't have any money. The accounts are frozen. Dylan stepped forward, his voice tight. We need help. Just for a little while. Until I sort this out. The irony nearly made me laugh. The man who'd called me ugly, who'd dismissed my warnings, now begged on my doorstep. I crossed my arms. What happened to all those billions you were disrupting, Dylan? His jaw clenched. This is temporary. The investors panicked. But I'll fix it. Will you? I said softly. Because panic isn't the same as a mistake, it's the smell of something rotten. Amelia's lower lip trembled. Please, Grandma. We haven't eaten since yesterday. I stepped aside and let them in, but not out of pity, out of strategy. Watching them sit at my table, the same table where Dylan had once mocked me, was a satisfaction I savored. I made sandwiches, plain peanut butter and jelly. Dylan bit into his like it was a 5-star meal. Amelia sniffled through her first bites. When they finished, Dylan spoke again. I know you're upset about what I said. It was a joke. But your family. I stared at him, unblinking. Family doesn't laugh while stabbing you in the heart. Amelia sobbed quietly. I stood, my voice calm but steely. You came here thinking I'd save you. But you forgot something. I'm the one you mocked. The one you underestimated. Dylan looked up sharply, sensing the shift. The revenge, I said evenly, has just begun. The words hung in the air like a gunshot. They left soon after, muttering apologies, but I saw the flicker of fear in Dylan's eyes. That fear was only the beginning. That night, I opened my lockbox again. Inside were the remaining contacts and evidence enough to dismantle Dylan completely. I wasn't just going to wound him. I was going to erase his empire, piece by piece, until the world saw him for what he truly was. As I closed the box, the city lights outside blinked like distant stars. For the first time in years, I felt powerful again. If that confrontation gave you chills, subscribe, like, and comment, because in Chapter 9, I start digging up skeletons Dylan hoped would stay buried. The night after Dylan and Amelia left my porch, I barely slept. My mind raced through every dirty thread I could pull, every weak point in his shiny empire. Dylan Harper wasn't just arrogant, he was careless. And careless men always leave skeletons. At dawn, I dialed a number I hadn't used in over a decade. "Ruth," I said when the gravelly voice answered. "Do you still have access to the old financial case archives?" Ruth chuckled. "You mean the backdoor stuff?" "For you, Maggie, always." Within hours, a secure folder landed in my inbox, records from Dylan's early career. Buried in the files was a quiet settlement with a freight company, accusing him of skimming funds during a merger. The case never saw court. Dylan had paid for silence. This was gold. I forwarded the documents to a seasoned journalist under a pseudonym. "Follow the money, Harper's past isn't clean." By afternoon, Business Ledger posted a new article. Emerging evidence suggests Harper Logistics CEO involved in past settlement scandal. Investors panicked further. Dylan's face appeared on TV screens nationwide, now accompanied by phrases like alleged fraud and ethics concerns. Meanwhile, Amelia called again, this time furious. "Grandma, are you doing this?" I kept my voice level. "Doing what?" "You know what. This feels deliberate." "Amelia," I said softly, "sometimes the truth just surfaces." Her breath hitched. "Dylan says enemies are after him." "He made them himself," I replied. Later that evening, Martin texted, "Big meeting tomorrow, word is, Everstone might drop Harper entirely." That night, I watched an interview where Dylan tried to smooth things over. His usual charm faltered under the reporter's sharp questions. For the first time, the golden boy looked desperate. As I turned off the TV, my heart ached for Amelia. She was tangled in a man's downfall, a downfall I'd set in motion. But the memory of Dylan's smirk, "Ugly people don't get invites," hardened me. This wasn't just revenge. It was justice. If Dylan's empire cracking excites you, subscribe, like, and comment. Chapter 10 shows desperation turning dangerous. The following morning, New York buzzed with scandal. Financial talk shows debated Dylan's credibility. Harper Logistics, meteoric rise or master fraud, blared one Chiron. Everstone Capital officially withdrew funding at noon. By 3, another major partner severed ties. Harper Logistics stock, once soaring, plummeted. On social media, former employees hinted at toxic practices. The world smelled blood. Dylan called me. His voice was hoarse, strained. "Margaret. I need to talk." "Then talk. You don't understand what you're doing. This isn't just me, it's Amelia's future, too." I stayed silent long enough for him to squirm. "Please," he continued. "I can fix this. I just need a bridge, cash flow to reassure the investors. You've got connections. Help me, and we can." "Help you?" I cut him off. "The way you helped me, by humiliating me in front of my own granddaughter." "That was a joke," he snapped. "A stupid joke." I let the silence stretch until it burned. Then I spoke, calm and deliberate. "No, Dylan." It was the mask slipping. The call ended abruptly. That evening, the New York Post published another bombshell. Federal regulators were reviewing allegations of financial misconduct. Dylan's once loyal employees began leaking emails, evidence of reckless spending, shady vendor deals, even forged approvals. By midnight, Harper Logistics' website crashed under the weight of bad press. Amelia posted nothing on social media. Her silence spoke volumes. I stood at my window, Manhattan's skyline glittering like a million secrets, and whispered, "What goes around comes around." The next morning, a luxury SUV screeched into my driveway. Dylan stumbled out, wild-eyed, clutching papers. "Margaret," he shouted. "This isn't fair." He shoved the documents at me, letters from banks demanding repayment. "I'll lose everything. They'll take the penthouse, the cars." I stared at him, unflinching. "You built your kingdom on lies. Now it's crumbling. That's not unfair. That's gravity." Amelia stepped out of the SUV, tears streaking her face. "Grandma, please." "He's scared." "So was I said softly, when the only family I had laughed at me. Dylan's face twisted, rage and fear colliding. He stormed off, slamming the SUV door. The tires screamed as they sped away. I exhaled, steady but trembling. The revenge had felt satisfying at first, but now, as Dylan spiraled, I sensed this was only the beginning. If Dylan's downfall has you hooked, subscribe, like, and comment. Chapter 11 reveals a twist Dylan never saw coming. The storm I'd unleashed was now a hurricane. Harper Logistics filed for bankruptcy protection within a week. News outlets ran relentless stories about Dylan's meteoric fall from grace. Investors scrambled to salvage what they could, while regulators circled like vultures. But Dylan wasn't done fighting. Late one evening, I received a thin envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a bank transfer record. My name was listed, falsely, as the recipient of funds stolen from Harper Logistics. I laughed bitterly. Dylan's desperation had driven him to frame me. I called Martin. He's trying to drag me down with him. Martin cursed. Don't worry. I'll leak proof that transfers are fake. But be careful, cornered men do stupid things. The next day, a tabloid hinted at mysterious links between Harper's finances and a private citizen. The insinuation was clear. Dylan was testing the waters, trying to muddy my name. I didn't flinch. Instead, I dug deeper. Using Ruth's files, I uncovered a more explosive secret. Dylan had siphoned investor money into an offshore account registered under a fake identity, an identity that linked back to a shell company he'd once bragged about at a party. I packaged the evidence and sent it anonymously to a federal investigator. That night, Amelia appeared at my door again. Her eyes were red. "Grandma, Dylan says you're trying to destroy us. He says you forged documents to make him look guilty." I sighed. "Amelia, I haven't forged anything. But Dylan, he's not who you think he is." She shook her head. "I don't know what to believe anymore." "You believe what's in front of you," I said gently. "Look at the man he's become." Her shoulders slumped. She looked so small, so fragile. "I loved him." "You still can," I said, "but love doesn't excuse lies." The next morning, federal agents raided Dylan's penthouse. Helicopters hovered above Manhattan, and news outlets broadcast live footage of boxes of files being hauled out. Dylan was led away in handcuffs, his designer suit wrinkled, his once perfect hair falling in his eyes. The golden boy was gone. As I watched the footage, I felt no joy, only a cold, deep satisfaction. Justice, finally. Later, I wrote in my journal, "Revenge isn't sweet. It's bitter, sharp, and necessary." If that twist shocked you, subscribe, like, and comment, because Chapter 12 will show the emotional fallout no one expected. The night after Dylan's arrest, Manhattan felt unusually quiet. The city never truly sleeps, but there was a lull, as if even the streets held their breath, savoring the fall of a man who thought himself invincible. I sat by my window, tea in hand, watching the skyline shimmer like a field of diamonds. News outlets replayed Dylan's downfall on a loop. CNN interviewed former employees who described years of intimidation and reckless spending. Even those who once admired him now distanced themselves. Harper Logistics officially announced liquidation. Yet, for all the satisfaction, an emptiness lingered. I had spent weeks pulling Dylan's empire apart, brick by brick. But vengeance, I discovered, doesn't heal, it just exposes wounds you thought had scarred over. Amelia called the next morning. Her voice was fragile. "Grandma, they took Dylan away in handcuffs. I saw. They're saying he could serve years in prison. He made his choices, Amelia. I don't even know who he is anymore." She paused. "And I don't know who I am without all of this." "You're my granddaughter," I said firmly. "You're the little girl who brought me dandelions. None of this changes that." She didn't answer right away. "I don't have anywhere to go." "Then come home," I said softly. That evening, she arrived on my porch, a small suitcase in hand. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen. She looked less like a fallen socialite and more like the child I once raised. I hugged her tightly, and for a moment, the bitterness melted. She whispered, "I'm sorry for everything." The next day, journalists swarmed my neighborhood, sniffing for a quote. I refused them all. Revenge was a private matter, and I wouldn't feed their spectacle. That night, Amelia sat at the kitchen table, staring at her tea. "Did you plan all of this?" I hesitated. I protected what was mine. She nodded slowly. It doesn't feel like victory. It isn't, I admitted. It's survival. If this moment between grandmother and granddaughter struck your heart, subscribe, like, and comment. Chapter 13 will show Dylan's desperate last gamble. A week after the arrest, the city buzzed with rumors. Dylan had been released on bail, his trial set for later in the year. I knew men like him rarely surrendered quietly. The first sign came on a Thursday evening. A black car idled across the street from my house, its engine purring in the dark. The same car returned Friday. On Saturday, my mailbox contained an unmarked envelope with a single photograph, Amelia entering my home. No message, just the picture. That night, the phone rang. Dylan's voice was raw, almost feral. "You think you've won, Margaret?" "I don't think anything," I replied evenly. "You ruined me. You ruined yourself." "I have friends still," he hissed. "Friends who don't play by your rules." I didn't respond. The next day, Amelia found a threatening note slipped under the door. "This isn't over." She trembled as she handed it to me. "Grandma, he's dangerous." "He's desperate," I said. "And desperate men make mistakes." I called Martin. "Dylan's trying to intimidate me." "Let him try," Martin said. "He's too radioactive now. One wrong move and he's done." Still, I wasn't naive. I installed a security camera and double-checked the locks. Sunday afternoon, while Amelia napped, I drove to a quiet suburb and met Ruth at a coffee shop. I slid her a folder, final evidence of Dylan's offshore accounts, enough to bury him if he tried to drag me down. "Deliver this to the prosecutor if he makes another move," I said. Ruth raised an eyebrow. "You're prepared." "I have to be." That night, Dylan called again, his voice eerily calm. "You could stop this, Margaret. Tell the investors you exaggerated. Tell the press you were wrong." "I didn't exaggerate," I said. There was a pause. "Then, you'll regret this." When the call ended, I stared out at the city lights. Regret? No. But I felt the chill of a man cornered, a predator still dangerous even with broken claws. If Dylan's return sent a shiver down your spine, subscribe, like, and comment. Chapter 14 brings the storm's violent end. The night was cold and brittle when the storm finally broke. At 2 a.m., the sound of shattering glass jolted me awake. Amelia screamed. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under my bed and rushed downstairs. In the kitchen, a brick lay among shattered glass. A note was tied to it, "You don't win." Before I could react, headlights flared outside. A car's engine roared to life. I glimpsed a figure in the driver's seat, Dylan. The police arrived within minutes. They took my statement, photographed the damage, and promised to patrol the area. The next day, news outlets reported Dylan had violated his bail conditions by leaving his residence without notice. Martin called. "He's imploding, Maggie. He'll trip himself up." He was right. 2 days later, Dylan was caught trying to board a private jet to the Cayman Islands. The FBI arrested him on the tarmac, additional charges piling up: attempted flight, witness intimidation, and evidence tampering. The trial that followed was merciless. Prosecutors used every piece of evidence Ruth and I had collected. Investors testified. Former employees revealed years of fraud. The leaked offshore accounts sealed Dylan's fate. Amelia attended the hearings, sitting quietly in the back. She never once met Dylan's eyes. When the guilty verdict was read, fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, Dylan's face hardened into a mask of disbelief. The judge sentenced him to 20 years in federal prison. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for a statement. I offered none. Revenge was never for their entertainment. That evening, Amelia and I walked through Central Park. The city glowed around us, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange peace. She slipped her arm through mine. "You really did it, Grandma." "No," I said softly. "He did it to himself. I just stopped pretending not to see." If Dylan's dramatic downfall gripped you, subscribe, like, and comment. Chapter 15 delivers the emotional closure you've been waiting for. Spring arrived in Manhattan with soft rain and blooming cherry trees. Amelia and I sat on a park bench, the air fresh and alive. For the first time since the wedding insult, laughter felt possible again. Harper Logistics was now a cautionary tale taught in business schools. News cycles moved on to newer scandals, but whispers of Dylan Harper's fall lingered, a warning to every arrogant opportunist. Amelia had taken a job at a non-profit helping small businesses recover from predatory investors. "I want to build something good," she told me. I smiled. "That's what your mother would have wanted." She squeezed my hand. "And you, Grandma, you're stronger than anyone I know." Some nights, I still thought of Dylan, not with hatred, but with a cold, distant pity. In prison, he'd have time to reflect on the bridges he'd burned and the people he'd mocked. Perhaps he'd finally understand the weight of cruelty. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Dylan's prison. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. "Margaret," it read. "You were right. I was arrogant. I hurt Amelia. I hurt you. Maybe prison is what I deserve. But part of me still hates that you won. I guess some men never learn." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Some wounds didn't need reopening. That evening, Amelia and I hosted a small dinner for neighbors, the kind of warm, ordinary night that feels like victory in its own quiet way. Laughter filled my apartment, mingling with the smell of fresh bread. As the night wound down, Amelia raised her glass. "To Grandma," she said, "for teaching us that strength doesn't always roar, it sometimes whispers and waits." I raised mine too. "And to what goes around," I added, "always coming around." Outside, the city lights sparkled like distant stars. For the first time in a long while, I felt whole. If this journey moved you, subscribe, like, and comment, because sometimes the best revenge is simply living well.